Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we're going to be discussing the Rambam, Hilchos Ishus, Perek Tezvav, Halacha Vav. The subject is the Mitzvah of Pirya Verivya. Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we're going to be discussing the Rambam, Hilchos Ishus, Perek Tezvav, Halacha Vav, concerning the Mitzvah of Pirya Verivya, being fruitful and multiplying. The Rambam rules as follows. Hayulei banim b'geyusai. Person had children when he was not Jewish. V'nizgayer hu v'heim, and he and his children converted. Harei zakayim mitzvah zu. He fulfilled this mitzvah of Pirya Verivya. This is based on a dispute in the Gemara Yevamos, Daf Samcha Beis, where Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish argued about this very case. Rish Lakish says, since he had the children when he was not Jewish, he had not fulfilled his obligation. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees and says that as long as he is now Jewish, we don't care if the children are converted or not, he has fulfilled the mitzvah. The Rambam rules in favor of Rabbi Yochanan, but he adds something that is not mentioned in the Gemara. He adds the proviso that not only does he have to convert, but his children with whom he fulfills the mitzvah also have to convert. Now the Gemara doesn't mention this. So the question is, where did the Rambam get this from? Now, the Mefarshim, one of them, the Karen Eira in Yevamos, says it's more logical that in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Pirya Verivya, it should be done with children who are themselves part of the obligation, they're mechuyev in all the mitzvahs. So it's logical to say that, but the question is, what is the source? Where did the Rambam get this from? Furthermore, the Maharil, one of the early poskim, the early Achreinim or late Rishonim, disagrees with the Rambam clearly, and he says that even if they didn't convert, if children did not convert, he has fulfilled the obligation of Pirya Verivya. And it also seems that Tosfos agrees with that. So let's understand that what is the crux of the dispute between the Rambam and the Maharil, and also what is the Rambam's source? Where did he get it from? So there are various Mefarshim who try to prove it from different Gemaras. I'm going to try to suggest that the source of the Rambam may be a Gemara in Megillah. The Gemara in Megillah says that you're not allowed to sell a Sefer Torah for anything in the world, with two exceptions. You could sell a Sefer Torah in order to learn Torah. A person wants to go learn and there are expenses involved and he has no way of covering those expenses. He's allowed to sell the Sefer Torah to accommodate his desire to learn Torah. And the second exception is in order to get married. So the Gemara explains what's the basis of these exceptions. So the Gemara says that the reason why you can sell a Sefer Torah to learn Torah is because learning Torah mevil lidei ma'aseh. When you learn Torah, it leads to action. What does that mean? It means that learning Torah is different from any other mitzvah. You can't sell your Sefer Torah for any other mitzvah. You want to sell a Sefer Torah so you should be able to buy tefillin. You can't do that. Sefer Torah is sold in order to buy a mezuzah. You can't do that. So why is it only to learn Torah? Because when you learn Torah, it's mevil lidei ma'aseh. It leads to all the mitzvahs. You can't keep mitzvahs unless you know how to keep them. So therefore, that overrides the problem with selling a Sefer Torah. What about selling a Sefer Torah to get married? So the Gemara says, because it quotes a pasuk that the world was not created to be desolate, it was created to be inhabited, which you can only fulfill by having children. So the question here is, why is Pirya Verivya, you're allowed to sell a Sefer Torah for Pirya Verivya, acceptable? We said before, and it seems from the Gemara, that you can't just sell a Sefer Torah for any mitzvah, only the mitzvah of learning Torah, because it leads to all the mitzvahs. So why is Pru Revu different from all the other mitzvahs for which you cannot sell a Sefer Torah? So the answer might be based on what the chinuch, the very first mitzvah in the chinuch, mitzvah Pru Revu, says the following: Misharshe mitzvah zu. What is the root, the basis of this mitzvah? Kedei sheyeh ha'olam miyushav, so that the world will be settled. Sh'Hashem Baruch Hu chavetz b'yeshuvay, Hashem wants the world to be inhabited, and he brings the pasuk that the Gemara brings, and then he adds, "V'hi mitzvah gedela." It's a great mitzvah. Shebesibasa miskaimes kol hamitzvahs ba'elam. Because only through this mitzvah can you fulfill all the mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are given to humans, not to angels. So if you don't have children, who's going to do the mitzvahs? The angels? The Torah was not given to them. So what does the chinuch say over here? That the whole underlying basis of this mitzvah, Pirya Verivya, is to facilitate the observance of all the mitzvahs. So the truth, therefore, is that the reason why you could sell a Sefer Torah for getting married is because it's the same rationale as you can for learning Torah, because that will lead to all the mitzvahs. So too, Pirya Verivya. It's not because it's a greater mitzvah. It may be a greater mitzvah, but why is it a greater mitzvah? Because it leads to all the mitzvahs. And that could be the source of the Rambam. The Rambam says that in order to fulfill the mitzvah Pirya Verivya, the children have to be Jewish. They have to convert as well. Because if they don't convert, your Pirya Verivya is not leading to all the mitzvahs. These are people who are not mechuyev. They're not obligated to do all the mitzvahs. And we could prove this point from the Maharil himself, who disagrees with the Rambam. And he discusses the question, what happens if you have a child, Le'olenu, who's a cheresh v'sheita, a deaf mute, who is mentally incapable of knowing what a mitzvah is all about, and a shaita person who's mentally challenged, in which case they don't have any understanding of a mitzvah, and they are exempt from all the mitzvahs. So what happens if your child, God forbid, becomes one of those two? Did you fulfill the mitzvah Pirya Verivya? And the Maharil says, absolutely. And he says, kal v'chaimer. If you can fulfill it even if your child is not Jewish, but you're Jewish, who has no connection to Judaism, certainly you can fulfill it for a cheresh v'sheita, who has a soul, has a neshama, a Jewish soul, and is also they are also b'nei mitzvahs. They are also subject to mitzvahs. So what is the Maharil trying to say? He says, even if you follow the Rambam, who says that they have to be Jewish. Why? Because if they're not Jewish, they don't have mitzvahs, and the whole purpose of Pirya Verivya was in order for them to have mitzvahs. Here you see that even the Rambam would agree, because they are b'nei mitzvah. Of course, the obvious question, which is a question asked, cheresh and shaita are not b'nei mitzvah. They're not mechuyev in mitzvahs. But I think the answer is very simple. They're not mechuyev in mitzvahs. They're not obligated. But the Radvaz says in Hilchos Edus that if they do a mitzvah, they get schar, just like any person who does a mitzvah, any Jewish person who does a mitzvah, the schar is like a person who ain't a mitzvah v'yaisa, who's not commanded, but still gets schar. And it seems that he holds that they have a connection to mitzvahs. Their connection is that they're not obligated, but it's optional for them. And according also to the Chassam Sefer, a cheresh and shaita, you're not allowed to give them something that's forbidden, just like you're not allowed to give a katan, a minor. The Trumas Hadeshin says there's a difference between a minor and a cheresh v'sheita, because a katan has a chiyuv of chinuch. He's eventually going to become mechuyev b'mitzvahs, but the Chassam Sefer disagrees with that, and that points to the idea that a cheresh and shaita, even though they're not obligated, they're still going to be considered b'nei mitzvah. And that could be the shita of the Maharil. At any rate, the Rambam's shita is that the mitzvahs, that the children that you have to be capable of connecting to a mitzvah, either having the obligation or l'chol hapachas, having a connection. On the other hand, the Maharil has a different understanding of the Gemara. The reason why you could sell a Sefer Torah in order to fulfill the mitzvah Pirya Verivya is because the mitzvah Pirya Verivya is in a class of its own as an important mitzvah. Not because it leads to all the mitzvahs, but because it's kiyum ha'elam. Hashem created the world, and He wants the world to remain. That's what the pasuk says. And that's something that, according to many opinions, applies to not only Jews, applies to non-Jews. So it's a universal mitzvah. One could still ask, there are many mitzvahs that are considered to be mitzvah rabbah, great mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah of having tefillah b'tzibur. And the Gemara says you could free your eved in order to fulfill this mitzvah. There are mitzvahs that the Gemara says are equal to all the mitzvahs. The mitzvah of milah, the mitzvah of tzedakah, the mitzvah of mezuzah, the mitzvah of tefillin, and mitzvah of tzitzis rather, not mezuzah, the mitzvah of tefillin, and others. And yet they're not You can't sell a Sefer Torah for those. So you have to say that Pruavu is in a separate class, or even in relation to all those other mitzvahs, because without Pruavu, there's no world. And therefore the whole purpose of creation would have been thwarted. And that's why the Maharil says you can sell the Sefer Torah, not because it leads to mitzvahs. Whether it leads to mitzvahs or not, it's still considered to be a mitzvah worthy of being able to sell the Sefer Torah.